Hi everyone, Tunilea here and welcome to the Africa History channel, where we bring to you snippets of African history from the perspective of Africans themselves. Last episode, we discussed how the Fulani had been in West Africa as early as the days of the great Sahelian empire of Ghana, Mali and then Songhai, and how they started their first non-Islamic state, the Empire of the Great Folo, in the 1600s. This episode will pick up from where we ended, as the Torodbe, who tried to do a jihad in the Great Folo Empire, set out to establish the first of the successful Islamic Fulani jihadi states, the Bundu Imamate. Let's get started. In 1690, one of the Torodbe Muslim Fulani who had taken part in the failed jihad attempt in the Great Folo Empire migrated southwards towards the Futajalon Highlands. But as he went with his followers, he came to an area under the nominal rule of remnants of the Sonike of the Ghana Empire that fell 500 years earlier. The area was fertile and on a small plateau between the Gambia River and the Faleme River, providing good pasture for their herds. It was also sparsely populated with small Sonike, Fulani, Mandinka and Wolof settlements. This man, Malik Sy, would meet the local Sonike leader in Gajaga, and through a combination of trickery and persuasion, he would obtain permission to settle in the area with his followers in the fertile confluence of the Senegal and Faleme rivers, calling the settlement, which would later develop into the capital of his state, the Bundu Imamate, Bulebane. Thus, without fighting an actual jihadi war, Malik Sy was able to establish the first Islamic Fulani-led theocratic state between Futatoro and Futajalon. He would also take the title of Al-Mami from the Arabic Al-Imam, denoting one who is in front or leads in prayers. This was also a masterstroke. The existing Sonike leaders could not accuse him of granting himself kingly titles, since Al-Mami was more religious than secular. The leaders of the subsequent Fulani jihadi states in the area would use the same title until Uthman Danfodio broke from this in 1804, when he established the Sokoto Caliphate with a different title. Perhaps because of this method of formation of the Bundu state, where he did not conquer the existing ruling structures under the banner of Islam or an internal Islamic revolution, Malik Sy and his successors had to incorporate many of his non-Muslim subjects into governance. Bundu therefore was unique among the Muslim Fulani-led states in that while the leadership was Muslim, the adherence to Islamic law in the state was only nominal. It was not known as a strictly observant region, and when the state would ultimately fall to another Fulani jihadi state in 1851, led by El Hajj Umar Tal, this would be one of the key justifications Tal would give for attacking another Muslim-led state in the area. With news of the establishment of the state reaching the Muslim Fulani population in Futatoro to the north, under the animist Great Folo Empire, and the Futajalon Fula from the south, Bundu began to receive migrants, strengthening the power and cohesion of the state. It would not be long before Malik Sy gave up the rules and proclaimed himself ruler of the area in the early 1700s. Conflict finally arose, and the Bundu first fought to subjugate the people they met on ground in the area, enslaving many. They established a plantation economy run by these slaves while retaining the prerogative for herding cattle. This model would continue to be adopted and refined by the subsequent Islamic Fulani states. Soon, Bundu would come into conflict with more established and organized states like the Mandinka of the remnants of the Mali Empire to the east, who still controlled the Bambouk goldfields, and the Wolof to the north, who put a halt to Bundu's expansion. This meant that Bundu was constrained to go towards the sea. A third element that first appeared in Bundu, which would continue on a larger scale in its successor states, was the state organization. While all the land in the state was nominally owned by the Almami, he appointed local leaders from amongst family and other loyalists. These appointees came to exert actual control on the ground and developed some autonomy from the center. Bundu would continue to be ruled by descendants of Malik Sy, who came to be known as the Sisibe, but this structure sowed the seeds of the collapse of the Bundu Imamate. While it remained a relatively small state, the Bundu Fulani's situation close to the Senegal and Gambia rivers provided them early access to Europeans, and as their constant conflict with their neighbors yielded the slaves that Europeans came to buy, they were one of the first states to receive European firearms, enabling them to dominate the upper Senegal Valley and prevent the non-Muslim Wolof, Bambara and Great Fulu, as well as the Muslim Mandinka, from overrunning their small state and protect their trade routes along the Senegal and Gambia rivers towards the coast. All the Europeans active in Africa at this time, including the French, British and Portuguese, traded actively with the Bundu, and they also traded into the trans-Saharan trade as well. In this period, the Bundu were very active slave traders, as the story of a Bundu prince, Ayuba Suleiman Diallo, illustrates. Born in 1701, just 11 years after the Bundu state was established, Ayuba was the quintessential Torodbe of the period, with a proper Islamic education, trained in the Quran and fluent in Arabic, in addition to his native Fulfulde. He was the grandson of Malik Sy and therefore part of the royal family of Bundu. By the mid-1720s, Ayuba had married 2 wives and had children of his own, and he was an accomplished trader. In 1730, at 29, he was on a trip to the coast, accompanied by his servant and interpreter, Lamin Ndiaye, to purchase supplies such as paper and cloth, and to sell 2 slaves. On the journey, Ayuba and his party were captured by their enemies, the Mandinka, and he was stripped of his rich robes and his head shaved before they were sold to the Royal African Company merchants at the coast. This story illustrates that slave trading was not the exclusive preserve of the Bundu at this time. In fact, the Muslims, who had the advantage of being able to find other Muslim communities they could easily integrate with on the basis of religion as they moved around, were the itinerant traders and healers in this period. And both Fulani and Mande Muslims took advantage of this to become the primary slave traders in the region as well. The Europeans were only too happy to buy from anyone that met their demands, as we will see in the rise of Fouta Djallon and Fouta Toro, the reversal of the wealth patterns brought by this growth in trade, which concentrated more wealth in the hands of the Muslim Fulani at the expense of the mainly non-Muslim peoples like the Soso Jalonke, who initially controlled some of these areas, did much to aid the rise of the Fulani. It is ironic that trade with the Christian infidels, as the Muslim Fulani saw them, would be a significant contributor to the rise of the jihadi states in the region in this period. Ayuba would convince one of the RAC agents called Pike of his high social status and that they would fetch more money by ransoming him to his father. But word did not return quickly enough from Bundu, and so Ayuba and Ndiaye were shipped to America, where he would work first in cotton farming and then in cattle herding, which he excelled at naturally since it was a skill he possessed, being Fulani. Ultimately, Ayuba will get a letter out which would reach a director of the Royal African Company, James Oglethorpe. Oglethorpe would purchase Ayuba for £45 in 1733 and arrange for Ayuba to return to the Gambia the next year. Ayuba would arrange for the return of Ndiaye sometime later as well, choosing not to forget his faithful servant in America. Ayuba was an extremely rare exception in the slave trade. Due to his education and monetary prowess, he was able to legally escape the hardships of slavery and return home to Africa. The Bundu that Ayuba returned to in the short 4 years he had been away was moving towards disaster. Fractures began to appear in the royal Sisibe clan not long after Malik Sy passed, and from the mid-1750s, 2 factions emerged. The first of these factions was based in the capital at Bulibani, while the second had its power base in another town called Kusan. By the time Ayuba passed in 1773, these factions had thrown Bundu into multiple civil wars over succession. The wealth from trade and the European guns made the fighting more deadly. Another famous Bundu man was a victim of these wars. Richard Pierpont was captured at 16 in 1780 and sold into the transatlantic slave trade, this time not by Mandinka enemies but by Bundu on the opposing side of a civil war. He would go on to fight in the American Revolution on the British side and in the War of 1812, and then settle in Canada. He would never return to Bundu like Ayuba did. Scottish explorer Mungo Park would pass through Bundu capital in 1795, and he offered a first-hand account of the country at this time. By his record, the capital had large defensive walls and housed nearly 5,000 families. By 1818, when British officer William Grey visited the capital, the Bulebani faction had asserted control temporarily over the Kosan faction and ended the civil war. This period in the early 1800s saw a difference in the approach of Europeans in the region. Trade with Europeans was centuries old, and the Bundu did not have a problem with them as long as they were in small numbers and remained on the coast, mainly at their port post in St. Louis on the Senegal River. But from this period, the French expanded into the Senegal Valley and the British along the Gambia River, two areas that were at the core of Bundu trade. In 1820, the French established a permanent post in Bakel, far inland on the present-day border of Senegal and Mauritania. The Bundu Fulbe skillfully played the French against the British in the region until 1845, when the French established a new post in Senu-Debu. From here, the French intervened more actively in Bundu internal politics. And when the Almami, who had been able to manage playing the Europeans against each other, Sada Amadi Aissata Si, died in 1851, the French intervened in the succession crisis. Bundu devolved to a civil war that was more deadly than those of the 1700s. This state of affairs provided the charismatic El Haj Umar Tal, a Torodbe who had been born in Futatoro, to intervene. Tal declared jihad against pagans, lapsed Muslims, European intruders, and the backsliding rulers of the Futadalon and Futatoro area in 1852, with a 50,000 strong army behind him. In his eyes, Bundu had never been serious about following the tenets of being an Islamic theocracy, tending to ally with non-Muslims and even Christians. El Haj Tal was determined to right what he considered grievous wrongs in Bundu. It was perhaps poetic that it was the last of the Fulani jihadist states of West Africa, the Turkolo Empire under El Haj Tal, that will bring an end to the first of these Islamic states, the Bundu Imamate. In a cycle that will continue to repeat itself, the Fulani jihadist states will first be founded by a strong clerical core who will be committed to the ideals of an Islamic theocracy, but they would quickly be succeeded by a more warrior or bureaucratic class who would, in the process of state building, have to make compromises that were pragmatic, but which more hardline clerical cores would consider to be a departure from the founders' Islamic ideals. Ultimately, a new Fulani faction would emerge that would bring jihad to their predecessors, restarting the cycle. In the next episode, we move to the second Fulani Islamic state and the first to be established through successful jihadi war in West Africa, the Imamate of Futadalon. Thank you and see you next time. Don't forget to like, to share, and to subscribe